Hi, welcome to AI Trust Talks. I'm your host, Emma Johnson, and I'm excited to have you here. Artificial intelligence is changing the way we live, work, and connect, but with great power comes great responsibility. That's why this podcast exists, to deep dive into the critical conversations about AI safety, ethics, and responsible use. Every episode will explore the real-world challenges and opportunities AI brings, from helping business owners and corporate leaders make better decisions, to empowering data scientists to create responsible solutions, to guiding parents on how AI impacts their children's safety. This podcast is for anyone who cares about building a future we can all trust. So whether you're here to learn, debate, or just stay ahead of the curve, I invite you to join me on this journey as we shape the future of AI together. This is AI Trust Talks, where we build trust in technology, one conversation at a time. Today we're exploring the evolving landscape of law, technology, and human trust with a guest who bridges all three. Marisha is a lawyer, legal technologist, and creative problem solver who has worked across continents, shaping innovation in the legal space and beyond. With a deep-rooted passion for designing the future of law, one where AI and humans collaborate effectively, Marisha brings a unique perspective on translating trust into technology. Join us as we dive into thought-provoking conversations on building systems that build confidence and trust, reimagining the legal profession, and the intersection of strategic design and emerging tech. Marisha, I'm so excited to have you on the show today to AI Trust Talks. Just in the short time we've known each other, I can tell we've both got a lot of content we need to discuss and lots of ways forward to keep AI trustworthy and safe for humans. So I've got a couple of themes I want to go through with you today, and I want to start with designing for trust. So what does designing for trust really mean in the context of AI? And where do most organizations get it wrong?
So I think designing for trust is really interesting as a concept. And thank you so much for having me here. By the way, I'm really excited to talk to you about this. One of the things that I found is designing for trust means that you're more intentional about the way that you create whatever you're creating, whether that's AI, whether it's technology, really bringing the humans into that element of how AI and technology fits into their daily workflow. And so one of my favorite examples of designing for trust, I was working with a law firm. This was back when I was at Parsons, and they said, look, we're building this new legal tech tool, but we want people to be able to trust it. And so we went out and interviewed a skydiving instructor, because we said, who builds trust really, really quickly? You're standing there on the plane, you've known this person for like 3 minutes, and you're about to jump out of a plane with them, right? So you have to build trust quickly. And one of the things that person talked about was the idea of like connecting with the human. And that's how we build trust, right? So designing for trust, especially in terms of AI, I think is fitting it into human workflows, having humans be able to test how they use it. This was I was working with another law firm, and we got all of the partners of the corporate banking team in a room, and we were trying to get them to use this AI. And the first thing that they did, it was a document review software, right? And the first thing they did was check for all of the specific things that they thought it was going to get wrong. And it was like, oh, is it going to recognize this clause? Like, is it going to recognize this word? And then it became kind of a gamified experience where they came back and they said, okay, we trust it now because we've tested all of the twisted ways we could think of, and it came back with the answers we expected. And so there's almost this personification element when designing for trust as well.
I love it. I love the idea of the skydiving example as well. We love a bit of storytelling around here, and such relatable conversations that I've had as well around really getting people to understand the output and using AI as well. So, can you walk us through a time where human-centered design helped bridge the gap between the building the trust with users in an AI system?
In my work, a lot of what I do is people come in with a piece of technology or something and they say, look, like we've done everything we can, people aren't adopting it, what's going on, right? And more often than not, it's not about the technology is great, but it's usually about people and process, and understanding where in their process this technology is going to fit in. So to give you an example, we had this uh, tool that was supposed to make it easier to capture client information, right? Very simple. But the law firm partner came in and said, look, all we need is a form. We're going to build a form and then everyone's going to fill this form and that's how we're going to use it, right? And I said, okay, but what do you want the form to do? Why do you need a form? And she was like, we just need a form. Like, don't ask me questions, right? And eventually, what we figured out through using human-centered design, which means that I went out and spoke to the associates, the people in the firm that were supporting the team, like the partners, like every person in that team, and understood what their needs were. And the needs were not a form. It was the system and the technology that they were using was too complicated, and it didn't have the fields in the specific order that the associates liked to fill it in. So, it asked for the client number and then it asked for something else that they didn't know. So they had to then go to the admin stuff and then they had to come back. And it was a whole issue around doing that. And so we built something where the associates did what they usually do, which was write an unstructured email, right? Then we threw a little bit of AI in there so that it could then create a structured form of data that the staff could then put into the system. And so ultimately, yes, I guess in theory, what they needed was a form, but that wasn't the challenge. And so human-centered design is really about putting the humans at the center and saying, what is your challenge? And then figuring out all of the tech around that, that can help solve that challenge.
I think you've really hit the nail on the head when you talk about people and process. If I see where the adoption of AI has not been meeting expectations, it's because it's either doesn't meet what the people are asking for or the people don't know how to use it. So you either need to elevate that sort of ideation and working together and getting that diversity of thought into helping build that solution that is actually required, not just what either the technologists think is required, but the real people actually in that process. And then also just the training, getting people up to speed on how to use it effectively, what it really will, the value it will really bring to your day-to-day life. So I want to jump now to a bit about experimentation and how do you ensure responsible experimentation? So in highly regulated industries like healthcare or in law, how do you balance innovation with compliance when you're experimenting with AI?
So I think there's a couple of different elements to that. The first is, I think, most importantly, mindset, because especially in highly regulated environments, we kind of have this idea that any form of making a mistake, of course, is unacceptable, right? And that's right. When you hire a lawyer, you don't want them putting a comma in the wrong place that's going to cost you $10 million, right? You want someone who is going to be perfect. And so as in your daily life, whether you are a doctor or a lawyer or, a compliance professional, your job is to be perfect. And so moving from that to a mindset of play and experimentation is often really challenging. And so something that I've found to be useful is just creating that space to say, look, the consequences of failing in this context are not big. Like, you are allowed to fail, you are allowed to make mistakes. And whether that's more specifically around using, for example, dummy data or using it on low stakes challenges, usually ones that are not client facing or that are internal and kind of, if it doesn't work, that's okay. Getting people comfortable with the idea of experimentation, I think, is a big part of responsible experimentation. And I think helping to have compliance people be part of the team early and often, and not use the idea that they are, somehow the people that are going to, say no and put it all away. I often say my whole job is converting the legal department from the department of no to the department of yes and. That's really kind of, I think, where responsible experimentation comes in, is that if you have people in from the beginning, working as a team, and working on low stakes things where they can form the habit of trying and learning new things, then that helps us go forward.
I love that. And I totally agree when you are in that development stage is bring the right people to the table, bring your compliance teams or your legal teams along to the discussion when you're looking at how you want to develop for the future and just getting that diversity of thought. We all kind of go into a new project with really good ambitions and the right mindset, but we may miss things, and just having the right people at the table in that development stage is really critical. So, what are some of the guardrails you believe should be in place before launching any AI pilot in a regulated space?
One, of course, is around data and understanding, and this is usually where I tend to serve as translator between technical people and the people actually using the tool to say, look, they're like, well, I read this thing about the guy that used ChatGPT, and then he got all of his cases and they were all made up, and hallucination, and so actually kind of setting up those guardrails of helping people understand what the technology is, what it can and cannot do. And then in terms of data security, which more often than not is not so much about the actual infrastructure, it's about people using it, because people put data in that they may not necessarily understand where it's stored, how it's used, all of that. So I think that's one. The second is kind of understanding what the criteria is for something succeeding or failing, so to speak. Like, at what point do you take the pilot and say, okay, this worked and that's great, or it didn't? And in some ways, having that be a guardrail is good, because you can push against something and say, okay, it's working in this way, but maybe not this way. So I think those are some of the ones that I would definitely highlight.
And you raised a really good example about the lawyer that used ChatGPT, and I think it's quite a common sort of story that people tell as well. And it is, fortunately or unfortunately, these types of stories that help us really start to address the risks. And it's just that point around we need humans to understand what those risks are. Not everybody understands that generative AI or ChatGPT and user systems like that, or user-friendly systems like that, can actually really hallucinate. They can have bias. They can give you factual inaccuracies. And how do we kind of bring that awareness and that knowledge to the humans that are starting to use this and embrace its power, is just to make sure they understand the risks. And I think through talks like this is where we start sharing those messages out there to the public, the general public, to really get them to think about using it better, using it responsibly as well. So just on that note, what skills do humans need to develop to become better collaborators with AI, especially in roles that value critical thinking and creativity?
I think part of it is, like you said, critical thinking is a big one, because for anyone that's used AI extensively, or even if you've played around with ChatGPT or some of the others, it will give you back what you feed into it. In the sense of, we talk about prompt engineering and things like that, but there's a piece there where if you ask it the right questions, it is much more likely to give you a better response, which, funnily enough, is true for humans as well. So I think the idea of critical thinking, of taking that knowledge and saying, everything that it says may not be completely accurate, and that's okay, because guess what? That doesn't happen with humans either. I often get senior partners saying, well, you say it's 99% accurate, but what about that 1%? And I always say, would you take the work of a junior associate or an intern and send it straight to the client? Or would you review it? Would you apply kind of that critical lens to it and say, oh, this isn't right, this isn't how we do it in practice, whatever it may be? That's kind of where I see AI and humans collaborating at this point, at least, where it is something to bounce ideas off of, it's something to be creative with, to be able to very quickly create prototypes or test ideas. Or one of my favorite things to do is to give AI different personas and say, you're a senior partner in a law firm. I'm asking you these questions. You are, a patient in a healthcare system that has these challenges, right? Like, tell me what you're thinking, what your challenges are, and all of that. And to be able to do all of that quickly, or create prototypes of products, or just test things with very little cost, I think is fascinating. And that really helps us push our own human creativity, because that base level of coming up with ideas, I do ideation workshops. It's always interesting because the first level of ideas that comes out is very usually quite surface level, and obvious. And so being able to collaborate with AI to push it further, and say, okay, these are the obvious ideas, like let's go again, let's try again, I think is really interesting, and forcing us to be like, well, AI can do this, so then what am I doing? Like, what's our value as humans, kind of in that loop, I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. I always say you're only as good as your prompt. Learn how to prompt effectively, and that's probably some of the upskilling that humans need to do right now. I mean, just on the point around creative thinking, there's a lot of research out there now about the fears of AI taking away that critical thinking from humans. And that's just something that we need to keep bringing to the table, and making sure that that human in the loop is really not using AI to replace them, and it's really using it to help build areas where they do need that creative flair a bit more, or they do need help, and using it as your best friend, or using it as your co-pilot to be able to actually help you, but not to replace you. So if we were to look at the future, where we think AI and legal is going, if you were designing an AI for lawyers toolkit for the future, what would be the must-haves to ensure it's both useful and trusted?
What I love about toolkits is that there's different tools in them, and so what I would include definitely is this idea, like you said, of a co-pilot, right? Someone who is helping lawyers do the type of work that more often than not they don't want to do. And usually lawyers thrive on strategic thinking. We want to do that kind of big thinking, and the type of work that's like, how do we actually solve this challenge? Not the base level drafting of an agreement or things like that, but more kind of actually solving the challenge. And so I think what I would include in a toolkit is um, a trusted friend, like you said, somebody, a co-pilot that was trained on all of the precedents of a specific law firm, so that you knew that if there was a draft coming out of this co-pilot, it was something that was vetted, was, in the style of the firm, and kind of had all of the nuggets of what was best across the knowledge base. In terms of making it more trusted, I think I'm a huge fan of gamification. I think I would have an element of it where you got kind of like the way that we sometimes hack for security measures. I would do something similar where I'd have, lawyers come in and say, okay, try and make it do something incorrect, right? Like, challenge it. And I think that would improve trust, and it would create situations where we could also then improve the tool, so that the people using the tool knew that it had been vetted and tested, and challenged, so to speak. And then I think the other one that I would do, which may seem obvious, is I would embed it into Word, because despite what we've tried for the past many years, lawyers in general, we like Word. That's where we live. That's where we work. And so if it isn't in Word, it's probably not getting used as much. So just meeting people where they are, I think, and having it be something that helps fire that creativity and that belief that this is going to be a tool that is going to continue to evolve and continue to help us grow and do things faster, and maybe go home at not 3 a.m. because we can do stuff faster and more accurately.
This is such a good point. And this is where I say AI would help my mental health and anyone's mental health, because it's doing tasks that make us more efficient and more effective. And you're right. If I can use AI to do a job faster, I can then have more time with my family and my friends. And that's what's really going to matter in the world, in the future world, is how can we bring that in? And I love the example you gave about Word. In my very previous life, I used to have to work with lawyers a lot. I won't go into too many details, but everything had to be on Word. So it really resonated that you were talking about lawyers and the good old Word as we used to know it and where it's going in the future. So I want you to complete a sentence for me. The future of AI and human trust depends on.
Us. When I say that, I mean, people in general, humans in general, but especially people like you and me, and people in the industry and around that are working to make AI more trustworthy and finding ways to use it responsibly. And I think that as we continue to be creative and collaborative with it, people that are going to help shift the mindset towards it and build that trust and bridge the gap, are going to be the ones that help that human AI trust future.
I love it. Thank you. I finished my questions, but I'm going to ask a few more if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Cool. In your experience, has there been any times where you've got a lot of pushback around using AI safely? Or have you been in a situation where someone's kind of felt this sort of thing was just really like a tick box or another governance thing that we need to really think about? And how have you approached that situation and got stakeholders to believe in doing the right thing?
Very much so. I think, especially probably 2 years ago, when ChatGPT exploded and AI really became something that was in people's hands, the first response that I usually got was absolutely not. Right, we're blocking ChatGPT. You don't even have access to Google. Like, what makes you think that we would ever allow something like this? And that goes back to that element of trust, right? Because there was a mistrust of the technology. There was a mistrust of the people using the technology. Oh, there's going to be some associate that pulls it up on their phone and feeds something that's sensitive information into the system and all of that. And so I think what helped in that situation was mapping out who the stakeholders in the situation were. And usually there was a decision maker who didn't have the information that they needed to make an informed decision. And that's usually where a lot of that fear and mistrust came from. Having those conversations and being the facilitator of those conversations between, a young associate who had used ChatGPT in their personal life and saw the benefits, the compliance, team who was saying, look, it's not going to be easy, but we can do it. Having the technology team there and saying, look, our current system is not engineered to be able to handle this, but we're working on it. And then ultimately having that senior decision maker feel informed and empowered to make that decision, and understand that it's not just a tick box type of situation, because it's going to continue to evolve, right? And really kind of pushing on that fact that this wasn't just a fad that was going to go away. This was intertwined with the way that we were going to do business, how our business models were going to change, the way that mentorship and training was going to change within the firm, all of these different elements, and really seeing the impact that something like this could have. Harkening back to the idea of, moving from WordPerfect to Word, like everyone thought it was going to be a disaster. That was like, oh, it's never going to happen. Change is never going to happen. But I always go back to the idea that as lawyers, or, any sort of regulated profession, we deal with change all the time. That's what we do. Laws change, standards change, compliance changes, and our whole job is to navigate that change and, think about ways of protecting our clients as that change happens. And so feeding into the skills that that profession prides itself on, in a way, combining that with AI and kind of what the future was going to be, was something that really helped.
Yeah, I really like that. And for me, I'm always saying when we're trying to govern AI to do good is to always stay agile. New risks come up, new ways of managing and mitigating those risks come up. And it's so key for us all just to stay ahead of the game. A lot of what you said resonates with me. I'm so glad that I don't feel so lonely anymore. And those conversations can be difficult ones. But I think it really is around kind of storytelling and really giving examples of where it's gone wrong and how we can help to mitigate that, because unless you do use it safely, it will impact your business. Really key reputational risk can come about. I remember when I was first using ChatGPT, and my husband and I were having a bit of a play around with it. I'm just going to say that again. My husband and I were having a bit of a play around with it, and he doesn't have a huge online profile for various reasons. And I just put his name into ChatGPT. It completely profiled him. ChatGPT knew his ethnicity, knew where he'd come from, a lot of rugby players that come out from this particular country, and it just absolutely profiled him, then saying he was a complete criminal and all of this kind of stuff, and listing out all these particular instances. And whilst it was a bit of a joke and a bit of a game, it actually became quite scary. And that's when I really was looking deeper into generative AI and the impact it can cause humans with all the factual inaccuracies that it's there. Obviously, it's getting better and more training data is coming in, but we all just need to be so well aware of what can happen. And I think it's only when it impacts you personally that you really start to gain interest into what you could do to make it better. So is there any advice you would give those getting into this space? I always have people reaching out to me saying, I really want to get into the world of AI and AI governance. What do you recommend? And for me, I come from a very diverse background when we talk about kind of my career path. So I don't really have one answer, and I don't think there is one answer. I think anyone with skills, who's curious, who sees the need, sees the value, can actually drive change. So what advice would you give to someone that wants to get into this area?
I've been a lawyer, I've been a designer, I've been or I guess I am, an AI person now. But for me, the advice would be play, right? One of the major advantages that we have with AI and the AI space is no one has more than 3 years of experience with ChatGPT. So in many ways, that helped me when I was first getting into it, because I didn't need 20 years of experience, right? Like there was something that idea of saying, oh, you're young, you don't have enough experience, was no longer true, because no one has that much experience. So I think playing with the tools that are out there, really understanding it and starting from what right? Whatever that industry may be, whether you are a student, whether you are, in construction, or an artist, or, in real estate, whatever that may be. Start from what you know and see where you can use AI in that space. That's, a lot of the work that I do is, like having events and things like that, where I say, you know what, I'm going to grab like 10 real estate agents and have them play with AI tools and, see what comes out of it and where they can use it, where they see that need for it. And so to that idea of, human-centered design, enough and enough about yourself and your own experiences that you can take that next step into understanding, where AI would fit in and being curious, like you said, and also asking the experts, right? Reaching out to people that have 20 years of experience developing the technology or whatever it may be. Like that's where the collaboration comes in because it is something new and it's going to continue to evolve. And that's really exciting.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much for joining me today. I think we've just had such relatable conversations, both in our different fields, bringing together that collaboration, that diversity of thought, and just making sure that we all play a role in making sure that we keep AI safe and trustworthy. So, Marisha, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for today's episode of AI Trust Talks. I hope this conversation has sparked new insights and empowered you to think critically about the role of AI in our lives. Together, we have the power to shape the future where technology serves humanity responsibly and ethically. If you have found this episode valuable, don't forget to subscribe, share, and join the conversation. Your voice matters in building a trusted AI future. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and let's keep building trust in technology, one conversation at a time.